Greetings, everyone here on Earth and beyond. This is the Paranormal Pete Show. I'm your host, Pete Orbea. We're on episode 46. Whew, can't believe that. Episode 46 here on WLTK-DB.com. That's Let's Talk Radio. And with great shows throughout the whole week on this station. So if you're wherever you're watching from, be sure you at least take a moment to go over and check out the website, WLTK-DB.com. Right behind me here. If I can get it in the shot there. There you go. So definitely check out the website. There's great shows all through the week and a lot of great content. If you have an open mind or looking to have your mind opened, this is a great place to be. Episode 46. We're in the holiday season, so happy holidays to everybody listening out there. And always grateful for so much support in the show. It's very humbling, but happy holidays, whatever you're celebrating out there. And hope it's safe and fun and memorable. So happy holidays to everybody. Got a couple of housekeeping things. So there'll be no live shows December 20th through January 3rd on the station here. We're taking a holiday break. So there will be no live shows until January 3rd. Of course, I'll be coming back on January 4th. Coming up next week, I'm super excited. The producer for this show, Michael Beers, he's going to be on the show next week on December 7th. And for episode 47, I can't wait to see what we get into talking about. Whether it's Bigfoot or remote viewing, or we'll see where the conversation goes, but very excited to have Michael Beers on the show. And thanks again. He's the producer for the show. And then I've got researcher Ginger Lockwood coming on December 14th. And that'll be my final show for the year. And what a way to end it. So I'm really excited to talk to Ginger and again, see where the conversation takes us. As you know, on the show, I like just have a conversation and see what happens. And usually some really good questions and thoughts come out when you approach it that way. So that's I enjoyed doing that. So we've got Michael Beers and Ginger Lockwood coming up to round out the year. And then we'll be back January 4th. And I'll be announcing over the holidays new guests that are booked in the new year. Can't believe I'm going to say in the new year, 2022. It's really flying by. And I've got a couple of course, I've got Ghost Walk tours coming up. My one that's this Saturday, December 4th, is sold out. But I have a public investigation on the 18th. And then I've got one tour and one public investigation per month through January through April. So if you want to take a tour of Port Gamble and see the haunts and hear the stories and learn about the history, head on over to portgambleparanormal.com and you can see dates and get tickets and everything right there. So the tours have been a lot of fun this year. And it's just been fun to share the history of this place. I guess I really enjoy doing that. So if you don't know where Port Gamble is, Google it. It's basically across Puget Sound from Seattle. It's a really old town. Love it here. And it's a little New England town, started in 1853. So for the West Coast, there's lots of history here. And I just love sharing it. So check it out, portgambleparanormal.com. And of course, wherever you're listening from tonight, say hello. With our special guest tonight, love to get some questions going. So whatever platform you're watching on, whether it's the website, WLTK-DB.com, or Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, wherever you're watching from, go ahead and leave a comment, say hi, where you're from, and put your favorite color on there. What the heck? But we're going to get right into it tonight. And my special guest this evening for episode 46, I'm super excited for. It's James Clarkson, and he's an investigator who has stood in two worlds for many years. He's a career and professional investigator in the criminal justice field, as well as a lifelong researcher of the UFO mystery. And I like that he says the UFO mystery. After retiring a 20 years service, he became a child abuse detective, and then he completed another decade of service as a fraud investigator for a Washington State agency. Sounds like this guy's a really good investigator. Meanwhile, for the last 30 years, he has studied the mystery of UFOs with the same attention to detail that he applied to criminal investigations. In 1986, he joined the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, applying the same passion for solving mysteries to the world of high strangeness. James Clarkson has served as Washington State Director of MUFON and the Special Assignments Team for MUFON in 2017. He's also an author, and he's the author of Tell My Story, June Crane, the Air Force and UFOs, as well as Westport UFO Crash Retrieval Event. He remains involved in the UFO research, specializing in cases where, because of the official position of the witnesses to strange events, identities must be kept secret. Let's all give a huge welcome to Mr. James Clarkson. Hey, James.
Well, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here, Pete.
It's an honor to have you on, and I thank you very much for taking the time to do so. And we got one person saying hello from Paulsbo. All right. Hey, Chelsea, local person. Here's another one. Katie Brown, big supporter of the show. Hello from Olympia. Said she's heard Jim speak before, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. I have his books too. All right.
That's encouraging.
Yeah, there you go. And James, where can you get your books?
Well, the easiest way is to go through my website, and the book on June Crane is available in Kindle format, or it's available in a hardcover form. And basically, it's a PayPal link.
All right. We'll get some links up there for you post-show here so people can get your book.
My email needs to probably be in there because, as I recall, the Westport crash is not on there. So if somebody wants a copy, they can connect with me by email and we'll work it out.
Okay. All right. That sounds great. Hey, Mike, how you doing? Michael Beers checking in here. And so, James, where are you at? You're here in Western Washington as well.
I'm actually right now sitting in Cape George outside of Port Townsend.
All right. Love it. Michael Beers says, great book. Linda, big supporter of the show. Hey, thanks for listening. I love Port Townsend. It's a cool place. I just love it's got a interesting history.
It really does.
Yeah, it's been kind of all over the place. What a cool spot. If nobody knows where Port Townsend is, Port Townsend, Washington, just Google it and check it out. The history is really cool. There's a lot of neat places up there, and a lot of neat people, including James here. Greetings from Tammy and I and the rest of the WWIPS team. Hey, Lance, thanks for watching, you guys. All right. Well, we might get some good questions tonight with the people checking in here. So tell us a little bit about your career. You came up as a plainclothes military investigator.
Yes, I'm here in Washington State because of Uncle Sam. I'm from San Francisco. Life is always full of surprises, I've found, and sometimes you end up doing the thing that you never thought you would do. In my case, it was enlist in the Army. Okay. This was back at the end of the Vietnam War era, and I needed a huge change in my life, and I'd always been interested in law enforcement, and once I decided that it was going to be my choice and not that of my peer group or anybody else, I decided to pursue law enforcement, and the Army seemed like the quickest way to do it. And it all happened because one day at a formation, they said, we were about to graduate from military police school, and they said, we have openings in the following posts, and if we can put you where you want to be, we'll do it. And I heard a bunch of guys talking about how they couldn't wait to get back to Seattle and Tacoma, and I didn't want to go back to San Francisco, but I didn't want to be too far away. Right. And it seemed like the perfect compromise, and I fell in love with Washington State, and I've never left.
Oh, wow. Well, I'll echo Randy here who commented, thank you for your service and all those years that you did. Really appreciate it. Yeah. So while you're going through, your career, did you always have an interest in UFOs, or was that kind of sparked through your work? Oh, you always had an interest. Okay.
It kind of waxes and wanes. It depends on what else is going on in your life. As you probably know, in the paranormal field, the same thing is true of UFOs. You really better not quit your day job because you have to pay the bills some way.
Right.
And I did have a genuine interest in law enforcement. Don't get me wrong about that. It's a great passion in my life to try and do work of some value to people and to serve others and to kind of put your money where your mouth is about what you believe in and how civilized people should treat each other and what should be done with them when they won't act correctly.
Right.
So all of that fits into law enforcement. But meanwhile, in the background, ever since I was a teenager, I've always loved UFOs. And some of the best cases that I ever heard of, it all started because of a radio program, KGO Radio in San Francisco. They were interviewing John G. Fuller, who wrote a couple of tremendous UFO books. One of them was called The Interrupted Journey, which was the first really in-depth look at Betty and Barney Hill, the famous alien abduction case. And then Incident at Exeter, referring to a series of UFO events in Exeter, New Hampshire in the mid-60s. And the key events in that story involved on-duty police officers encountering a 50-foot in diameter disc that had glowing, scintillating red lights going around the outside. And it came down so low at one point while they were investigating a report from one of the eyewitnesses that the officer pushed this civilian down, dropped to one knee, and started to draw his revolver. And his partner, who had just pulled up, yelled, "Don't do it." And he didn't. But it was a very dramatic series of events, very well documented. And I was fascinated because, of course, it had the other element, was the Air Force saying that, well, they mistakenly identified a refueling stratotanker that was going overhead at 40,000 feet above the ground. And I thought, well, this is interesting. Here we have a policeman whose eyesight is so bad that he can't tell the difference between something that's about to flatten him versus a jet going overhead in the sky. Well, that you'll find all kinds of instances of this in the history of ufology where the official story, if you look close, makes less than no sense. That seems to be a familiar theme. And all too often, unfortunately, the media is more than willing to accept that and tell everybody, hey, y'all need to go home, nothing to see here, don't worry about it.
Right, and then just move on, nothing to see.
Move on. Well, yeah. I was always collecting magazine articles, books. If there was a special on TV about UFOs, I would drop what I was doing and watch it very attentively. I didn't really do anything in particular with it until after I got out of the Army. And that is all because, oddly enough, of a business card that was on the desk of the desk sergeant at Fort Lewis, Washington. I was a plainclothes military policeman, and I had a cup of coffee. And during a slack time, I was up shooting the breeze with the desk sergeant, and I looked down, and he's got like 3 or 4 phones on his desk and a big piece of plexiglass and all these business cards and papers. This is a busy guy. And I look down and I see National UFO Reporting Center, 206-722-3000. And I thought, military police station, business card for UFOs? I said, Sarge, what's this? And he just looks at me and he says, that's where we report UFOs. And then we went on and we had a discussion. Well, I filed that away in my mind. And it wasn't until years later, I got out of the Army in 1977. I became a reserve deputy sheriff for Thurston County. As a young man, you take tests all over the place and hope that somebody will pick you up. And I got hired, of all places, by Aberdeen PD, not knowing anything about Aberdeen. And I ended up working there as a policeman, and famous last words, I told myself, I'm only going to be here a couple of years and then I'll be moving on. Well, 20 years later, I was still there. Actually, my wife Joanne will tell you a similar story on her side, that was not her original intention. It just kind of worked out that way. And in 1986, in December, it didn't actually hit the papers until early 87. One of the most famous UFO cases occurred up in Alaska. Kenji Toroshi, a pilot who was flying a cargo 747 into Alaska, he and his crew observed a huge floating UFO, imagine something that's several blocks in size.
Yeah.
And it had smaller UFOs going around it. They called it in. They asked if there was any traffic in the area. The FAA, the radar people, first they said it was there, then it wasn't there, then it was there. Then the government told them, no, you're not going to say it was there. And years later, of course, the man who was in charge of that radar control room is long since retired. And he has now disclosed that, yes, indeed, they had the UFO on the radar, but they were told not to say anything about it by mysterious men in dark suits who were kind of vague about who they were and where they were from. So, I mean, this is what makes a classic UFO story. You've got a spectacular sighting, a professional witness, and a cover-up. You know, you got all of it. So I remembered that phone number, and I called up and I said, I don't want to report a UFO. I want to know how I can help. And the man who answered the phone was Robert Gribble, a retired Seattle firefighter who had started the National UFO Reporting Center out of his own pocket because he loved UFOs. And of course, you got to think pre-internet. This guy is typing out the reports, doing a weekly newsletter, folding it up, putting an address on it and a stamp, and mailing it out to all of his subscribers. I mean, we have it easy now.
Oh, yeah.
Electronic and boom, boom, boom. But this is the hard way, but he did it anyway because he loved it. And he introduced me to Peter Davenport, and he also introduced me to MUFON, because the first thing he said was, have you ever heard of MUFON? So I joined. And I had been an Aberdeen policeman since May 20th of 1979. But during the first several years, I didn't tell anybody I worked with about my UFO interests.
Okay.
They're cops. You don't want to give them an inch. They're the worst. There's two truths about policemen if you're in a department. Cops are the worst gossips in the world. You know, they are. Why? Because they get paid to dig up dirt on people. So they're ruthless and merciless with each other. And they're also the world's worst practical jokers. They love practical jokes. Well, eventually I was established well enough that I started letting people know that I was interested in UFOs. And I got alien dolls put in my locker that arrived there mysteriously. I had my own tinfoil hat. I mean, you know, they did it all. But people started telling me, officers, deputy sheriffs, everybody said something crashed outside of Westport. And I ended up about 6 years after the fact investigating it, and they were right. There's a big mystery down there that to this day has never been completely solved, and it's got it all. Multiple witnesses, some kind of mysterious craft, loggers who couldn't care less about UFOs, who claim that the military blocked the roads, and we have false statements by the military. I mean, this is like the perfect UFO case, and it has now been recognized by other researchers as fitting right into the classic UFO crash retrieval, syndrome format, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, the protocols.
Yes. So I ended up investigating that, and I also investigated, I would say, between MUFON, UFOs Northwest, and working with Peter Davenport, I personally can account for about 1,500 UFO investigations.
That's amazing.
Over 30 years.
Wow. I worked in the weddings business, and I thought I had it pretty cool being a part of like 750 weddings, but
Well, don't, contrary to, it used to make me sad because I would have people who wanted to join MUFON, and I'd be trying to train them as an investigator, and they would want to know if they could go with me when I went out on the next UFO crash retrieval. It doesn't work that way. If you get one good crash retrieval case in your entire career, you're doing better than most. Yeah. And I was even luckier because I also met an extraordinary woman who had an even more extraordinary story to tell. And it's all because my wife got me to start doing presentations in all the libraries, talking about great. UFOs.
Yep. You didn't think you'd end up there when you were younger, but
nope.
The universe had other plans for you.
That's right. Life is what happens along the way.
Exactly. Well, we're going to take our first station break here. It's 20 past the hour on WLTK-DB.com. When we come back with Mr. James Clarkson, I want to talk more about Elk River and the crash out there. So when we come back, we'll be talking about that. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Stick around. We'll be right back in just a minute. Thanks.
Looking to launch your new masterpiece? Then try something new with Moonbow Publishing and Production. At Moonbow, we have a strong desire to serve authors in a powerful and meaningful way. After all, you poured your heart and soul into your writing, and we fully understand and respect that. Remember this: you will own the copyright to your work. You will have the final say on your work before being published. Even after all of that, we've saved the best for last. We won't take a percentage sold. Nope, not a penny. Excited about MoonbowPublications.com yet? We thought so. Take advantage of our company's services like book editing, formatting, and covers, publishing, and photography. Moonbow Publishing and Productions has everything you are looking for in a company. Remember, we will not keep any commissions. We are a boutique publishing company focusing on spiritual, health and wellness, and personal growth genres. Moonbow Publications and Productions, a new kind of publishing company.
Right. Welcome back to the Paranormal Pete Show. I'm your host, Pete Orbea. We've got special guest, Mr. James Clarkson, on with us tonight. We're on WLTK-DB.com or any of the major platforms for streaming. Check it out if you missed the first part of the show. Just go to the website, and all the archives are there. So you can catch all the past shows or the beginning of this show. And so tonight, we've got Mr. James Clarkson here, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Elk River crash. Now, this happened in November of 1979, and you mentioned that you started at Aberdeen PD in May of 1979. So you were just coming onto the force at that time.
Yes, and you don't see when you're new to the force, you don't see much daylight. And being a young man, a young new policeman, I did not subscribe to the newspaper, to my eternal regret as a UFO investigator, because if I had, on that Monday morning, I would have seen a headline that said UFO crash in Elk River ? In big letters right at the top, and I know that would have got my attention.
Right. So, and you mentioned earlier that you didn't start investigating this incident until 1986.
Right.
Um, Now, were the eyewitnesses? I mean, that's not too long of a span of time. It's a decent, chunk of years. But were you able to interview the original eyewitnesses?
Yes, it was easy because it's a relatively stable community, and most of these people were at the same address where they were when it happened. And this is, I guess, there was less privacy concerns back then because I got the newspaper articles. There were 5 newspaper stories, and the witnesses were identified by name, and
Yeah,
it wasn't hard. And I didn't have to use police resources because that would have been a big no. I
right.
just looked them up in the phone book and called them up and said, I'm a UFO investigator, and I'd really like to talk to you about whatever you saw that night. And away it went.
Now, yeah, I mean, what was the reaction from these people? Were they wanting to tell their story?
Most of them did. They had no problem at all. I had no problem at all interviewing them. Now, some of them contradicted each other. I had a father and son. The son told me not to believe the father, but then the son turned around and told me that he saw a military lowboy with something big on it being taken out of the area with canvas draped over it. And yet at the same time, he's telling me I shouldn't believe his
Yeah,
father.
yeah,
I had off-duty police officers who said they saw military vehicles down there. And the point of all that is there is zero reason for the military to be down there for any reason. They don't use it out. We're talking outside of Westport. There's a bridge, called the Elk River Bridge on State Route 105, and you can look over to the left and across the water, and the mud flats is the area that this thing crashed in, and off to the right is Westport. So, there's no reason for the military to ever be down there. And we had witnesses who said that whatever this thing was, I was able to actually go back with a map, and I would ask each one of the witnesses, where in the sky did you first see the object? What direction did it come from? And what direction was it going when you couldn't see it anymore? And you could connect them on a map. It was
Oh,
very
wow.
easy. It
Nice.
started way out by Elma, Elma is 20 miles east of Aberdeen. And
Yeah,
then it's another 25 miles to drive from Aberdeen to Westport,
right.
out State Route 105. So all the way out there, people started seeing this flaming object going across the sky. And in particular interest to me, there was a lady, I believe she's passed on now, who lived in Central Park, who was taking care of her husband who wasn't doing very well. And she was able to even tell me which Sunday night movie of the week she never got to see the end of because her jaw was hanging down and her face was glued to the window. And she saw this strange thing going across the sky. And the way she described it, I kind of had this feeling like time slowed down for her when she was
Hmm.
looking at this thing. Because she told me about how it had windows, glowing windows, and part of it was on fire. And then she just knew. It was almost like a psychic connection. I can't prove it either way, but she kept saying, I knew they were in trouble. They were going down. They were going down. She kept repeating that they were on fire, they were in trouble, and they were going down to crash.
Yeah.
I had another man who contacted the Westport police. He was hysterical because he had seen this thing coming down out of the sky and it made a turn, which of course that puts it in a whole other category if the thing does a maneuver.
Yeah.
I mean, up until that point, you could say, well, maybe it's a meteor, maybe blah, 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 but meteors don't change direction.
Right.
And it looked like something made a last-ditch attempt to come down. Either it was headed for the ocean or it was going to hit Westport. But it made a maneuver instead and crashed across the mud flats. So I had all these witnesses to part one of the event. I also later verified with the various dispatchers that were on duty in the police departments. This is pre-911, so every major police department in the county had their own dispatcher.
Okay.
So, and people would call the emergency line to, want the police or the fire. They all said that when this thing was coming down out of the sky, the phone lights just lit up. They couldn't take the calls fast enough. So lots of people saw it, whatever it was. That's part one of the story. Okay. Part two of the story is what happened next. And that involved local people, many of whom had grown up together. Mm-hmm. One young man was out of school for several days. He came back and said that he had snuck in there past the military and that they took his camera. And then people started, his aunt told me that they were always hard up for money. They had a gravel pit fairly close to the crash area.
Okay.
And after this event, they got a brand new dump truck. And he would never admit that he was there. He would never repeat his original story. And that includes, I contacted him 2 different times, hoping that I could get him to come forward, and he never would. But his aunt insisted that he was lying.
Okay.
And so did his friends who grew up with him. Because, these are people, the community is so small, the same group of young people went through the grades together.
Yeah.
So they knew each other really, really well. We're talking a very small community out there. So then there's the funny little anecdotal stories about the guy who had a phone booth back in the days, phone booths for maybe you can explain to people later on what a phone booth is. But down at the end of his driveway, he had a phone booth, and he saw an unmarked sedan pull up, and he watched an officer get a military officer with the scrambled eggs on his hat, indicating a fairly high rank, get out of the car, go into the phone booth, make some sort of, he looked like he was on official business making this phone call, and then jump in the car and drive off. And again, no reason for the military to be there.
Now, the closest base is Fort Lewis, right?
Right.
Lewis McChord. And that's, what, 50
by
miles?
Tacoma.
Oh, it's probably more than 50 miles away then?
At least.
Yeah.
So, then there's Sergeant Robbie Robertson, who was everybody's favorite patrol sergeant working for Grays Harbor County. He was really interested in it, so he started his own kind of ad hoc search party. He sent all these guys in their 4-wheelers out on the back roads, and they never found anything because the military was already gone by then. This all happened on a Sunday night.
One night they came in, they got out there, set up whatever they needed to set up.
They did that within the first couple of days. I think it's obvious to me that they knew it was coming down. They had to already be rolling, or they would have never been able to respond that way.
Yeah, that quickly. Oh, yeah, indeed. Yeah, and it's really cool when you can break things down time-wise like that.
Oh, you've got to. You always try to set up a timeline. Because you want to know who was in what place when. Yeah. You always want to locate your witnesses. Could the witness, first off, could the witness have witnessed whatever it is they're reporting? Were they in the right position at the right place and the right time? Okay, if they pass that test, is the witness credible?
Right.
That kind of thing. So you analyze all along the way. And in fact, I guess the one way I would briefly comment, I approached UFO cases the same way I did my criminal investigations, because I was taught early on that if you're a good investigator, you're a bit schizophrenic. And the reason I say that is you're always talking to yourself. You're having an internal dialogue because there is this person inside of you that you carry with you. And it goes something like this. What would a reasonable man conclude if he was confronted with the evidence and the witnesses that are in front of me right now? What would a reasonable man conclude? And you're always asking that question, and that's how you proceed. What's the most reasonable course of action? What's the most logical? Can you make a mistake that way? Yes, you can. But more often than not, you won't. And this is where my ufology is probably different than some other people's.
Okay.
We're suffering from a really bad thing right now, which is that everybody has decided that they're an expert. And we've torn loose all of our moorings with scientific research, logic, objectivity, fairness, whatever you want to throw in there. This is just a 70-year-old man reflecting on his life and on what he sees going on around him. But everybody is not an expert. I'm sorry to disappoint people. And, just because you say that you were talking to the commander of the alien armada last night and you know what the Federation has planned for the rest of us, doesn't necessarily mean that it's true or that we're all going to instantly believe you without a little more evidence or some kind of corroboration, and there's too many people out there who watch 2 YouTube videos and suddenly they're an expert.
Right. There's too much of that going on. Yeah.
Yeah. It's all a house of cards built on a quicksand floor.
It's exactly.
It doesn't work. And I took at one point, I wanted to see how it would come out. I took 700 UFO. I did this partway through my time with MUFON. I had 700 cases that I had investigated, and I tabulated how they were all closed.
Okay.
Because we have categories of closure.
Mm-hmm.
And basically the way it works, out of every 10 cases that you get, 2 of them may be true UFOs. High credibility witnesses with high strangeness events that probably cannot be explained otherwise. In other words, they don't have a conventional explanation, not man-made, not natural. Right. You will get another 3 or 4 that have insufficient evidence. You just have to, like unsolved crimes. The police department cannot solve every crime. Hello. And some things you have to put on the back burner and you have to wait to another day. And sometimes what is unclear to you now, 3 months from now, it may be crystal clear how it all fits into a bigger pattern. So you accurately record the information, but you say, for right now, I can't solve this because it's insufficient information. And of course, the hard part with UFOs is when it comes to criminal investigation, a lot of people don't want you to get to the truth.
Right.
Well, when people report UFOs, the same thing can also be said, because if you end up telling them that they saw the International Space Station and they think it's aliens, they're going to be really unhappy.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, some people are really, really genuinely curious, and they really want to know what it is that they've seen. Because they just don't know. And you do the best job that you can to try and compare it to known things. And I brought up the space station because the International Space Station is one of the most misreported objects in the sky.
I can believe that.
It's really cool. If you've never seen it, it's well worth it. I mean, it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's very, very bright, and it goes across the sky, usually within an hour or 2 of sunset. And you could set your watch by when it arrives. And if you get a straight passover, it'll take like 3 or 4 minutes to go across the sky, and then suddenly it vanishes.
It's gone.
It's gone because, I've had people say, well, that's why it's an alien spacecraft, because it disappeared. No, it didn't disappear. It fell within the Earth's shadow, so it's no longer reflecting the sun, and you can't see it anymore.
And plus it goes over the horizon.
Right. Well, that's the other way, but I'm saying it will disappear well before the horizon because it falls in the shadow of the Earth and it's
Right.
gone.
Yeah.
A lot of people have never bothered to look at the night sky to figure out what's supposed to be there. And then you add in the third problem, which is that we don't know what an average UFO looks like. And a lot of our perception of size and distance is based upon known quantities. In the dark, you have a very limited frame of reference. And since you're talking about something that doesn't have I don't know how many feet long a standard Alpha Centauri cruiser is, a 2000 model.
Yeah.
With all the goodies on it. I don't know how big it's supposed to be. So I don't have anything to compare to. If I look down the block in broad daylight and I see a man standing next to a car, I can probably get pretty close to how tall he is just by eyeballing it. Why? Because I know how big the car is and all the objects around him. Those are all mental, but in the dark, you can't do that.
Yeah, exactly. You got to have that frame of reference. No,
exactly. So see, this is not simple. People think this is all simple and obvious. It's not.
Yeah, it's very complex, and you've spent many years figuring out what questions to ask,
and nobody wants it to be aliens more than me. Okay.
Exactly.
I'm still waiting for my big experience. That's the question I always get asked is, I always get asked that. Well, what experience have you had? And I always laughingly say, best summed up by the statement, always a bridesmaid, never a bride. I get to hear all these incredibly cool stories, and I find myself jealous and envious of the people who are reporting to me. I think, God, I wish that would happen to me.
I know. I get that sometimes with, hearing about ghostly experiences.
I'm sure you do.
It's like, I wish I could experience that. Great stuff. I mean, what a wealth of knowledge here. And we've got a great question. We're going to take our second station break here, WLTK-DB.com. And I've got a great question from the audience when we come back. We'll be back here in just a minute with special guest James Clarkson. And we're talking about all things UFO. And I got to say, your perspective on this is inspiring. So thank you. And we'll be right back here on WLTK-DB.com on the Paranormal Pete Show.
Meet Nicole Strickland, one of the leading San Diego paranormal researchers. Nicole offers a gentle and humble approach to working with spirit energies. Being the founder of the San Diego Paranormal Research Society, Nicole is no stranger to the unknown. Due to Nicole's vast knowledge of the paranormal, she is widely sought after for speaking engagements on topics like Children of the Paranormal, Paranormal Investigation 101 and 102, History of Spiritualism, and more. Not only does Nicole research the afterlife, but also writes about it, and is the author of several books pertaining to the paranormal and its history. She has appeared on television shows like My Ghost Story, Travel Channel's Famously Afraid, Good Morning San Diego, and more. Have a conference or event coming up? Contact Nicole on her website, authornicolestrickland.com. That's authornicolestrickland.com.
Oops, you caught me with my station merch. Go to the website. You can get all kinds of cool stuff. If you like the station, get something from the website there in the shop. So before we went to break, you were kind of talking about this alludes to this question. You'd kind of figured out with 700 cases, you get this many, probably you're likely to be true. So the question was, International Space Station aside, and maybe this is more current, what's the percentage of reports that you have seen or investigated yourself that you can definitely that are not a UFO? And I would also add that you could definitely verify that it was not a UFO. It could be explained.
What's the percentage?
Yeah.
So you want to know about IFOs?
What is IFO?
Identified flying object. Out of my 700 reports, I had 223, or 32%.
Wow. You just did that math in your head?
No, I have a PowerPoint up on my desktop that has that particular slide that's the statistical breakdown of the 700 cases.
Wow. Okay. So a third.
Right.
Yeah. So how about this? The military presence is a big part of it sounds like, to determine whether you've got something to really investigate, the military presence. How many of the cases would you say had a military presence reported?
Wow. Not that many.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, because as far as saying something that I could verify that it was the military, it gets really complicated again, because people, if they see a UFO, and anytime within 30 minutes of the event they see a helicopter go across the sky, it inevitably is described as a black helicopter. Forgive me for being a little cynical about this, but I can't help it. And the other problem we have is, where do those helicopters come from? People say, oh, the black helicopters were here. Okay, a helicopter is a complex piece of equipment. It has a limited flight range. You got to put gas in the thing. It came from somewhere and has to go back to somewhere. So, if you live 400 miles from the nearest military base and you just got a black helicopter, I don't know.
Yeah.
There are some that generates more questions.
Yeah, exactly. I've shared what I think is a possible Sasquatch experience that I had here in Port Gamble. And the part that has got me the most questions is within 10 minutes of me hearing this thing at 1:00 in the morning inside the tree line, just in Port Gamble here. I had 3 military Humvees cruising through Port Gamble at like 5 miles an hour with guys in machine gun turrets, spotlighting the area of the woods I was just hearing these crazy noises. And that's within 10 minutes of this occurrence. Now, there is a naval base nearby, but it's probably a 15-minute drive. So, I think the military presence and if you've got eyewitnesses that can verify it is, or if you yourself as an investigator, I mean, does that really make the case that much stronger if you can verify there was a military presence?
Well, the answer is yes and no.
Okay.
Because you're almost never going to get the military to give you a straight answer about whether or not they were there or not.
Okay.
And they're actually under no compulsion to tell you. You can, of course, do Freedom of Information Act, but that's become more and more limited and more frustrating. And we used to be able to get radar data from the military. But unfortunately, UFO investigators are their own worst enemy, and they overloaded the system, and then they would get angry with these. When you go to some bureaucrat who works for the military or some agency, and you say, give me all your UFO stuff. Okay. No, that's not how you do it. You ask them a very specific question and you frame it as tight as possible.
Right.
I have made probably 3 or 4 radar data requests. And excuse me, I had to pay for one of them for $200. They charge for them now because they don't want everybody and their grandmother asking for radar data.
Yeah. That makes sense. I can understand that.
So we can be our own worst enemies when we deal with these official agencies. You need to treat them, I'm always a little suspicious of them because they have a different agenda than we do. Sure. But you got to treat them with respect and you approach them very, very carefully. And you got to think about your future relationship with them. You may want information from them again. Are you going to be remembered as the nice, polite investigator? Or are you going to be remembered as the creep who demanded everything?
Exactly. We got a question from Michael Beers here, as we are running low on time. We're just doing an hour tonight. Asking if you can talk a little bit about the Vancouver, Washington event.
Oh, yes. I love that
story. Tell us about that.
Okay. It starts off with my wife and I going shopping. This is back in 2014. My phone rings. There's a very official sounding man on the other end who's very cagey.
Okay.
And he finally admits that he wanted to talk to me because he knew that I was ex-law enforcement. I was still working for the state then as a fraud investigator, but not a strictly criminal justice role.
Okay.
So he wanted to report something that had happened to him. And as we did this little tap dance around each other for a while. Okay. And we agreed that when I got home, we would get more serious. And it got a whole lot more serious. It turned out that in 2014, in the middle of the day, I believe it was June, he was on duty. He works for a 3-letter agency in the federal government. I will not tell you which one because I won't tell anybody, including MUFON.
Sure.
I've met this man face to face 3 times. Joanne met him twice. He's the real deal. He's everybody. He's the poster child for what you hope federal agents are. Sharp, bright, excellent health, dedicated, etc. No background in UFOs. Perfect weather conditions, broad daylight, waiting for a suspect who never shows up. He looks over the river towards Portland, Oregon from Vancouver, and he sees something about the size of a dime held at arm's length, and it's your classic metallic dish-shaped UFO. And he has no background in this, and he watches it go across the sky. He can see the shading change on it in the sunlight as it banks slightly, and his jaw is hanging down, and he's going through the mental checklist. No propellers, no jet engines, no wings, no tail, no ailerons, no nothing conventional. And he's telling me about this, and he says it went like 2/3 of the way across the sky, and he said that's when it got really weird. Okay. And I said, what's really weird beyond that? He said it disappeared. He said, I don't know whether it went away like it went through a hole in space or whether it cloaked itself and you couldn't see it anymore. But he said it looked like there was a ripple in the air, and as this thing crossed the line, it was no longer visible. And he's standing there with his jaw hanging down because he's never seen anything like this in his life. And he knows that this is really out there. And he's just seen this while on duty. Wow. About that time, here comes an F-15 fighter jet on afterburners from the direction of the Portland airport, headed in exactly the same direction. Now, I asked him for a written report, and of course, I never get it this good. He wrote me an absolutely superb, detailed report about this thing that he saw. I sent away for the radar data. I had Bill Puckett from UFOs Northwest make the actual FOIA request because he's a retired NOAA weatherman and he knows exactly how to write the letter. We got the data. He unpacked it. He put it on a map for me. In the same location in the sky where the object disappeared, for 2 passes of the radar, there was something solid in the air that did not have a transponder, which would be completely illegal for any aircraft, including a military aircraft, over a large city near an international airport. That would be a super no-no to fly without your transponder on.
Right.
And then it also had very visibly the path of the F-15 fighter plane. And there is a squadron or a small group of F-15s that are kept ready at all times, fully armed at Portland International Airport. So I've got a witness who is a bona fide federal employee, an agent, a law enforcement officer. He's placing his career at risk by making this report. He gives me every detail of a broad daylight sighting of a classic saucer-shaped metallic UFO. It exhibits very strange flight, and then it disappears in a completely unconventional way, and pretty obviously it's being pursued by the government. How can you have a better sighting report than that?
Yeah,
unless I could put the thing on a trailer and drag it in to show you, it wouldn't get any better than that. That's the Vancouver story.
Wow. And then that hits all the markers of what you want in a credible eyewitness story, plus validated, you can validate some of that information based on the radar information. You can validate his story.
And he's totally credible.
Wow. That is we need another hour. Thanks, Lance. Incredible stuff. So, well, let me ask you this. Would you put yourself, are you a believer in extraterrestrial activity, life forms, all of that? Because I think you have to differentiate.
I'm not a believer like in the sense that I have blind faith. I'm a believer because I am convinced by the overwhelming amount of evidence. We could do a week's worth of programs just on Roswell. I just finished reading the definitive treatment of the Roswell, New Mexico crash, and I was already convinced that it's the real deal anyway. In fact, my friend June told me it was real a long time ago, but it is real. Roswell was the crash of, I don't know whether it was extraterrestrial, a vehicle from the future, or from some other dimension, but something crashed in Roswell that had non-human beings aboard, and it was covered up by our government to this very day. I am absolutely convinced of that.
Right.
And now, it's one of many.
Have you, thanks, Michael. Michael says, we'd love to have you back on, and I will echo that. Have you, in all the reports and investigations you've done over the years, have you ever heard of or seen reports, got eyewitness of, let's say there's a sighting but maybe something comes as a rescue, possibly for something that has crashed, like at Elk River?
Yes.
Were there secondary sightings that were not related? Okay. What do you think about that?
Well, I actually had kind of put the Elk River Westport thing in a big thick file in my file cabinet and hadn't done anything with it until my wife said, hey, you need to take another look at that. She went through the file and located this tremendous witness who did not see the crash that night, but he saw very strange UFOs in the air above the crash area the next night, on Monday night. And this guy was a bona fide biologist working for the state of Washington, doing public outreach on marine life in Puget Sound. And he was completely open. He said, I don't care if you use my name. He said, I know what I saw, and I'll tell anybody that. I thought, wow.
Yeah.
And he gained nothing. He wasn't gaining anything by making that report. He just wanted to tell me what he saw. And he saw one big light with 4 other lights around it. He got onto this because he said all the cars were pulled over and people were watching it. And of course, being a wildlife researcher, when he saw the big UFO with the smaller ones behind it, he said it looked like a mother duck with her ducklings. And then mommy duck was in the middle and the little ones were kind of hovering around. And then all at once, all of them took off in different directions at extremely high velocity. How do you explain that conventionally?
Not conventionally.
Well, that's why when I wrote about his report in my book, I called it the other search party.
Yeah. I mean, if you put it together and you've got an open mind, I think that's pretty compelling, and what a neat story and set of circumstances. And you do have eyewitness reports. You've got some facts,
right?
And I think that just makes it even more incredible. And I've got a question here from Lance before we're done here. How does an investigator join MUFON?
I would say go on the website, and if you need more information, contact me through email or cell phone, either one. My cell phone is 360-701-1342 or UFO detective at hushmail.com, HUSHMAIL.com. There's a lot of information on the website about how to join.
Excellent.
And I know the state director because I actually recommended her to be my replacement when I stepped down.
Nice.
And she lives in Port Townsend. She lives in Port Townsend.
Oh, awesome. Well, we're getting to the end here, and James, I want to thank you for sharing your experience and some of the work that you've done. It's incredible. Again, thank you for your service to this country and your community. And I'm honored to have you on here. I'd love to have you back soon to check in and let's talk about some other reports. And I see talking about what makes a good UFO investigator, those sort of things. But honored to have you on, and wishing you wonderful, happy holidays. I leave every show with a toast, and don't forget to, thanks, Tony. It's a great show. Thank you. Thanks everybody for watching and the questions. Really appreciate it. Next week, I've got my producer, Michael Beers, coming on. And on the show, who knows what we're going to get into. And then I've got researcher Ginger Lockwood coming on the 14th. So I've got a couple of more great shows this year for you. And again, thanks everybody for listening. A million thanks to James for your time and all that you do and all that you have done in this field. But I leave this show with the toast that the past is history, the future's a mystery, but today's a gift because it's the present. We all need to take a minute each day and be present, be there in the moment. Look at what you got. Hug the ones you're with. Hug everyone else virtually for a little while longer. And James, wishing you happy holidays, and thanks again so much.
And all the very best to you and everyone out there.
Thank you so much. And we'll see everybody next week right here on WLTK-DB. I'm your host, Pete Orbea, the Paranormal Pete Show. Have a great night. Take care.
Thank you.